Elon Musk says it. What every investor and Bitcoin holder is waiting for, interest rates are going to fall, and he's going to make sure of it. That's ultra bullish for Bitcoin because Elon Musk will do everything he can to make those rates drop. Falling rates mean rising Bitcoin prices. We're going to look at how he plans to do that in detail. Plus, we have a huge statement from Fed Chair Jerome Powell, who publicly declares that the Fed won't stand in the way of banks introducing and managing cryptocurrencies. We now have the night's move from the Fed Chair, who clearly says, hey, no, we're not against Bitcoin, we're not against crypto. We might not endorse it either. We don't want to buy Bitcoin right now or anything. But at least we want to take a very neutral stance here. And that's already a really, really good sign here. Also, there was a really interesting new assessment from Horst Lüning on why you should definitely have Bitcoin right now. So, super explosive stuff we're looking at today. First, let's take a look at Elon Musk, because we now have the inflation data that just came in from the Fed. And they don't look good. So, it doesn't really look like you can just lower the interest rates right now, especially with the risk that inflation could rise even more. And we now have the statement from Donald Trump that, regardless of the inflation fears and the inflation data, he still wants to lower interest rates here. And Elon Musk goes one step further and basically confirms the view of Donald Trump, because Elon Musk and Donald Trump, they want to pump up the stock markets. They want to pump up Bitcoin, crypto. They want to see the markets pump here. You probably don't just mean Bitcoin, but it's clear that Donald Trump and Elon Musk will be big profiteers from falling interest rates. They'll suddenly be a few billion or a few million richer overnight because all those risk assets are going to go up. Here Elon Musk says, when it becomes clear that Department of Government efficiency works, you will see a decline in the yields of long-term treasury bonds. And all Americans will benefit from lower interest payments on mortgages, debts, small businesses, credit cards, and other loans. And what he says here is so shocking, because it's true too. The Department of Government Efficiency, as I said in the last video, is not necessarily responsible for short-term interest rates here, but for 10-year government bonds. Because that's just how it is here. If the USA makes itself attractive by restructuring itself, by becoming more efficient, by presenting more credibility to the outside world, by getting the deficits under control, then more investors will invest in the USA. Because the credit rating will also improve. Because, of course, I'd rather invest in a country where I know they can pay back their debts than throw my money into some Ponzi scheme where I know I'll never see it again. And that's why what's happening here is really intense. This leads to the fact that, according to Elon Musk and Donald Trump, the 10-year treasury bonds will decrease in the long run. Because rising demand for 10-year treasury bonds means falling interest rates. And that's good for Bitcoin because it means it's easier to go into debt. It costs less money to go into debt now. The new money that's taken on in the form of loans will eventually flow back into risk assets, of course into companies, but also into real estate markets and stock markets, and definitely here with Bitcoin. And that's why we have the indirect composition between interest and Bitcoin. On the one hand, there are short-term interest rates, which Jerome Powell apparently does not want to change. But Donald Trump has already put pressure on this. If Jerome Powell does not want to change the whole thing, then he will talk to Jerome Powell. But Jerome Powell has already said that he will not let him influence him, and so on. That is why we have to keep a close eye on how things develop here, because we now have different forces playing against each other. Donald Trump and now Elon Musk want to bring down the 10-year rates, but Jerome Powell doesn't want to lower the short-term rates just yet. He wants to get a handle on inflation first, which makes sense in a way. Because otherwise, you end up facing the problem of potentially hitting hyperinflation in the worst-case scenario. I saw this meme earlier that had a button on the left and a button on the right. The left button said recession, so you can either press the recession button, which means, like Jerome Powell, you don't lower the rates but keep them high, and then you hit a recession. Or you press the other button, which means lowering interest rates, but then you drift into hyperinflation. Sure, that's an exaggeration. It doesn't have to lead to a recession. It doesn't have to lead to hyperinflation either. But those are the different options that are currently available. And now check out this ultra bullish villa. A new villa is on the scene. Hit that like button if you enjoy this. If you want more videos from here or if you'd rather go back to nature. Down here you can still see the sea and up here you can see the bullish people. The Kobe C letter also has a really interesting take on that. Due to the deficit spending, there's a premium of at least 150 basis points in the yield of the 10-year bonds. Eliminate the deficit spending, and interest rates for Americans will go down. As we've emphasized multiple times, reducing deficit spending is crucial for lowering inflation and interest rates. So, we really have a buffer of 150 basis points here. That means, if they get serious at the Department of Government Efficiency, and if they really bring down the 10-year government bonds, then we have here 1.5 basis points that can go down here. And that obviously means a massive liquidity injection for the system. If we have a massive liquidity injection for the system, that means a booming Bitcoin price. So Valhalla is already pre-confirmed here. Absolutely crazy what's going on here. Guys, check it out. I just made it up to the rooftop. Hyper bullish. The location. It doesn't get more bullish than this. I just covered the yoga session here. They're doing yoga here. And I'm here feeling ultra bullish. Always about Bitcoin. And they're doing yoga and just chilling here. But that can't happen when such explosive things are going on here. You definitely gotta pump some content in here. But now something else ultra crazy has happened. We had a hearing, or I don't know how to say it. El Presidente. Jerome Powell here from the Central Bank of America is in the house. And he just said something incredible here. Something you might have heard from him before. But now he's saying it again. He publicly confirmed it here. And Jerome Powell publicly stated that the Fed will not stand in the way of banks when it comes to the introduction and handling of cryptocurrencies. Check out this statement. Here it is in the original. That's unbelievable because this is the night's move for Bitcoin. Or maybe not the night's move, but definitely an acceptance that Bitcoin is no longer some shady internet money. Bitcoin is not shady money for any criminals, but Bitcoin is a recognized financial instrument, even here from the Fed president.
There are really two things that are happening. One is banks are serving crypto customers, and we don't want to get in the way of banks serving perfectly legal customers as long as they understand the risks and that sort of thing.
So of course, he says, you have to understand the risks. And if they use Bitcoin or crypto here, then they just have to know what they're doing. You're basically giving the responsibility to the banks, to the service providers. But you're not saying, like it used to be with the SEC, that anyone involved with Bitcoin gets shut down, like you did in Operation Shockpoint 2.0, where you just said, hey, anyone dealing with Bitcoin, we're kicking them out of the financial system. We're just being open now. There are certain risks that the banks have to assess for themselves. Then they can use Bitcoin, and they can use other things. And that's a really, really good statement that I think every Bitcoin enthusiast can be satisfied with, or at least has to be satisfied with. Jerome Powell has also compared Bitcoin to gold before. He says he wouldn't buy Bitcoin himself, but at least Bitcoin is comparable to gold, and it can also be used by banks. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm up on the rooftop right now, just thinking. Look down here at the pool. Drop a comment from up here. So, we just need to wait a bit in the short term. Right now, there's a lot of commotion because of all the tariffs from Donald Trump and the inflation issues that have come up here. But in the long run, we have a very, very good trend here because Bitcoin has a stake in the global money supply. And here, Elon Musk wants to pump the money supply up, or rather, wants to push interest rates down. Then it's definitely good for Bitcoin. And now there's a really intense assessment here from Horst Lüning, who was asked about Bitcoin in a new interview. Very, very accurate, in my opinion. But get yourselves involved.
Just a quick note about Bitcoin. I've been saving in that for a long time, ever since I could afford to set some money aside from my paycheck, so to speak. And I see it more as a bit of purchasing power. But there's still speculation that Bitcoin could become a state reserve in the US, which could be announced during the Trump date mess. Are you following that too, or do you think, yeah, those are just more stories? I see Bitcoin as a way to preserve purchasing power, or just because I'm convinced of something else. Or what's the deal? What's behind Bitcoin?
Yeah, and there's a libertarian heart in my chest. On one side, we have our fiat currencies, which have been around since 1971 and actually even a bit earlier, when the 100% gold backing of the dollar was no longer there. I think at one point, you only had about 40% gold backing left. But at the latest since 1971, the entire global system has shifted from whatever gold backing was left to nothing. Thank you very much. You really have to think about how long such a system can hold up. And then there are always demands from all sorts of people that it should become a gold-backed currency again. And I personally think it's right to do that. But gold-backed currencies have a certain problem. If you haven't balanced your trade accounts, then you have to spend an incredible amount of gold to be able to shop. So the US can't afford its trade deficit with a gold-backed currency at all. And the Germans could do it. The Chinese could do it. The Russians could do it. And Argentina has recently been able to do it again. But France, Italy, the UK, and the USA, they all have negative trade balances. They just can't afford a gold-backed currency. So, what else do we have? Still as alternatives for an independent currency, and that would be a fully decentralized currency without government influence. That are now about, for example, purchases through the central bank. Yeah, it's independent, right? No, it's not. There's a finance minister sitting on it. And one who was actually convicted in France for, I don't know, embezzlement or misappropriation. Or I'm not sure what the right translation is. It was about 400 million. And the sentence was then suspended because of her personality. And as a reward, she then got the position of chairwoman of the ECB. Everyone should think about that for a moment. What's happening here, then it works. And so there's a connection between the ECB and politics here. On the other hand, if you look at a Yellen, who then became the finance minister in the U.S., so the carousel is spinning there too. That means we have political currencies here. They have a massive influence here. And politically, Bitcoin can now only be made a yes or no decision. You can either ban it or let it run. And with the recognition of Bitcoin by BlackRock and the launch of the Bitcoin ETF is for me, Bitcoin has been ennobled that the people behind it, the big investors, say yes. Bitcoin is something. We can do that too. And so for me, the total risk of loss with Bitcoin has massively decreased. And first of all, of course, you have to look at which country you live in. How do individual countries decide when you have a digital euro as a cryptocurrency? But it's not decentralized. It's basically a full currency under the complete control of the state. And banning everything is a really tricky situation. And then it's always said, what's behind Bitcoin? There's nothing behind Bitcoin. That's a joke of a number. There's just air behind it. And I have to ask, what's behind the euro? There's nothing there either. It's just air behind it. Then the theories come up that behind the euro, there's the gross domestic product and the seigniorage capital of the central bank. And the euro can basically inflate in the money supply until it reaches the seigniorage capital. Only after that, history has shown, currencies break. And I have to say, yeah, so. But Bitcoin can also go up that high. And since it's a global currency, it can rise up to the world's GDP. So what's the deal with that? So what's behind Bitcoin and what's behind the paper euro is basically the same thing, the creative power of people, the GDP of people, in one case just Europe, and in the other, the whole world. So in that regard, you have to say, from our perspective, that then Bitcoin is more valuable than the euro.
Horst Lüning is just taking a look at all the central banks worldwide. All the critics who keep saying Bitcoin is worthless. What's behind it is that Bitcoin is worthless. Blah, 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 the whole story. You keep hearing it over and over, even from people who really struggle with this, saying, yeah, but there's a state behind the euro. That's really great if we have a central bank and central entities. But that's exactly the great thing about Bitcoin. We don't have a central bank. And if we're really going to make the comparison about what's behind Bitcoin, then he's really hit a good point here. Behind the euro, there might be the eurozone, but behind Bitcoin stands the whole world. A lot of people say, or not a lot, but there are some folks who compare buying Bitcoin to having something like a global world ETF. Sure, the comparison isn't exactly spot on, because Bitcoin doesn't represent any companies or anything like that. But Bitcoin is the people's money. Bitcoin is for everyone. Bitcoin is the universal money. Bitcoin is the universal asset. And you just have to say, Horst Lüning, respect for how he makes it clear that this criticism is nonsense, saying that Bitcoin has nothing behind it. Bitcoin has no real value or anything like that. It's always the same arguments. Guys, if you're bullish on Bitcoin, I'm putting a link down below to ways you can easily, safely, and simply buy Bitcoin. Here's the code Bitcoin Hotel. Up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. I'm signing off, watching the sunset. See you later. Peace out.